Something serious is happening. A billionaire is being buried, but one person was missing. His beautiful young wife, Emily, never showed up. While the townspeople whispered about heartbreak and grief, his parents knew better. Something in their bones told them Emily wasn't mourning, she was celebrating. And when they decided to find out why, they uncovered a secret so dark, so twisted, it would turn the entire town against her.
The rain fell in thin silver threads over the small town of Maple Hollow, painting the graveyard in shades of gray. The townspeople stood silently beneath umbrellas, their dark coats rippling in the wind. In the center of it all rested a black casket, polished, elegant, and final. Inside it lay Richard Langford, the man who had once been the pride of the town. He had built an empire from nothing, the Langford Timber Company, turning Maple Hollow into a thriving community. People whispered stories about his generosity, his vision, and how he never forgot where he came from. But today, all those stories felt like ghosts on the breeze. At the front, Martha Langford stood with trembling hands clutching her husband's arm. Her silver hair clung damply to her face, her eyes hollow with sorrow. Beside her, Edward Langford stared at the casket, his jaw set tight. He had buried many things in his lifetime, his youth, his dreams, but never his only son. As the pastor's voice echoed through the cold air, people began to notice what wasn't there. The seat beside the grieving parents, the one reserved for Emily Langford, Richard's young and beautiful wife, remained empty. "She didn't come?" a woman whispered, her voice sharp as the wind. "They say she's too heartbroken," another replied. "Heartbroken or heartless?" a man muttered, shaking his head. Edward heard them, though he pretended not to. The words pierced him like tiny needles. Emily, the woman his son had loved so fiercely, the one they had never fully trusted. Too quick to marry, too polished, too perfect. As the ceremony ended, the mourners drifted away, leaving the Langfords standing alone beside the open grave. Martha brushed a trembling hand across the wet lid of the casket. "She should have been here," she whispered. "How could she not come, Edward?" Edward didn't answer right away. His eyes were locked on the black limousine parked at a distance, empty, untouched, waiting for no one. Finally, he said quietly, "Because she didn't want to." Martha turned to him, shocked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Edward said, his voice rough and low, "our son isn't even cold in the ground, and I can feel it. She's up to something." The rain grew heavier, beating against the polished casket like a warning. Edward stared into the dark soil below, his mind already moving. He had built his life on instinct, and that instinct now whispered a truth he didn't want to face. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. As they turned to leave, a streak of lightning split the sky. Martha clung to her husband's arm, her heart heavy with grief. Behind them, the wind carried away the last of the pastor's words. "May he rest in peace." But peace was the last thing coming to the Langford family. Because while the town mourned Richard Langford, his wife was somewhere else, doing the unthinkable. She was miles away inside the grand Langford mansion, dressed not in black, but in a silk cream gown, leaned lazily on the velvet sofa, a half-empty glass of champagne glinting in her hand, untouched by the cold, untouched by grief. Music played low from the old record player, a love song she used to dance to with Richard. Now it sounded almost mocking. "Here's to freedom," she whispered, raising her glass before taking a long sip. From the corner of the room, a man's voice replied, smooth and deep. "Freedom tastes better than guilt, doesn't it?" She turned, smiling, as Caleb Monroe stepped out of the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grin that carried both charm and danger. Caleb was the kind of man who never stayed in one place long, the kind of man Richard would have hated. "Don't start," Emily said, her smile tight but playful. "You know how hard I've worked for this." "Oh, I know." Caleb poured himself a drink, his eyes glinting. "It just seems fast. The man's funeral is today." Emily set down her glass sharply. "Don't talk to me about that funeral. I played my part for 3 years. The loving wife, the doting hostess, the silent shadow. I've earned every cent that's coming to me." Caleb watched her quietly for a moment and then asked, "You really think his parents won't suspect?" Emily laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "Those 2 old saints? They'll cry themselves to sleep for weeks. They'll never see what's right under their noses." But she was wrong. Back in town, Edward Langford sat by the fireplace with his wife, Martha. Neither could rest. Edward's mind churned with unease. Something about Emily's absence didn't sit right, not with the kind of woman she was. "She didn't even send flowers," Martha whispered. "Not one word." Edward nodded slowly. "Because she's not mourning. She's planning." The next morning he went to see Mr. Hensley, Richard's lawyer, a thin, gray-haired man with nervous hands. The office smelled of paper and dust. "She came in yesterday," Hensley admitted, lowering his voice. "Asked about the will, wanted access to his personal accounts, said Richard promised her control of everything." Edward frowned. "That's impossible. Richard never—" But the lawyer interrupted, sliding a folder across the desk. "She brought documents, signatures, dates. It all looks official." Edward picked up the papers, his stomach twisting. His son's name was there, but something about the signature felt wrong, almost too neat. He closed the folder, jaw tightening. "Get me copies of everything, every file, every paper she touched." As he stepped out into the cold morning light, Edward felt the first spark of something fierce stirring inside him. Not grief, but resolve. If Emily Langford thought she could bury her secrets along with his son, she was about to learn otherwise. Because Edward Langford was done mourning. Now he was going to start digging.
The days after the funeral moved slowly in Maple Hollow. The Langford mansion sat silent at the edge of town, its windows dark, its gates locked. But inside, secrets festered like rot behind marble walls. Edward Langford had always trusted his instincts. They'd built him a business and protected his family. Now those instincts told him one thing: Emily was hiding something terrible. He started quietly, first with Mr. Hensley. Together, they combed through financial records, medical files, and Richard's last will and testament. Most things appeared in order until Edward noticed the dates. "Look here," he said, tapping the corner of a document. "Richard signed this the day after his heart attack, but he couldn't even hold a pen then." Mr. Hensley frowned, leaning in. "You're right. His signature was shaky even weeks before. This one's perfect." The realization hit them both at once. Forgery. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Emily was growing restless. Caleb had been pushing her to hurry. "Once the estate transfers, we're gone," he told her, pacing the room. "Mexico, maybe. Somewhere quiet." Emily's lips curved in a smile. "Patience, darling. I just need the confirmation letter from the bank. Then it's all ours." But she didn't know
that Edward was already 2 steps ahead. He'd visited the bank himself and learned that she'd requested early access to Richard's trust, something only possible if a medical certificate declared his death unpreventable. That document existed too, signed by a private doctor Edward had never met. So he paid the man a visit. Dr. Mason was nervous from the moment Edward stepped into his office. His hands shook as he adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Langford said it was urgent," he stammered. "She said Richard wouldn't wanted to suffer." Edward's voice was cold. "Did she pay you?" The doctor looked away. That was answer enough. By the time Edward returned home, dusk had fallen. Martha sat waiting by the fire, her face pale with worry. "What did you find?" He placed the forged papers on the table. She didn't just lie. She helped him die faster. Martha gasped, covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, but beneath them burned anger, deep and fierce. "We can't let her get away with this." Edward nodded slowly. "We won't. But the law won't touch her without proof stronger than a doctor's guilt. We'll show the world who she really is." The plan began to take shape, carefully, quietly. Mr. Hensley found a recording Emily had carelessly left on her husband's office voicemail, a conversation between her and Caleb. Her voice was unmistakable. "By the time they realize we'll be gone, Richard was just in the way." Edward knew then what he had to do. He'd expose her, not in a courtroom, but in front of everyone who once admired her. The upcoming Langford Charity Gala, Richard's proudest creation, would become the stage for her downfall. And when it was over, Emily Langford would lose everything: her wealth, her reputation, and the power she thought she controlled. The storm had been brewing long enough. Now it was time to let it break.
3 months after Richard's death, it was time for the annual Langford Charity Gala. Though the family was mourning, they decided it should still hold to preserve Richard's memory. The gala had always been Maple Hollow's grandest event, a night of music, laughter, and generosity, hosted by the Langford family to raise money for local causes. This year, it felt different. The mansion was ablaze with light again, though the town still whispered about Richard's recent death. At the center of it all stood Emily Langford, radiant in a crimson gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her smile was flawless, her charm effortless. No one could have guessed that her world was seconds from collapsing. Edward and Martha arrived quietly, their faces composed but their eyes sharp. They had everything ready: the forged documents, the bank letters, the recorded phone call. And most importantly, the townspeople were all here to see the truth unfold. When it was time for speeches, Emily stepped forward to polite applause. She stood beneath a portrait of Richard, pretending to wipe a tear. "Richard always believed in giving back," she began smoothly, her voice honeyed. "Tonight, we honor his memory by continuing his vision. I'm so proud to carry his legacy." "Enough!" Edward's voice thundered from the back of the room. The music stopped. All eyes turned. Emily froze, her smile faltering, as the old man walked toward her with calm authority. He carried a small leather folder in one hand and a flash drive in the other. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight, forced. "I'm doing what my son can't. I'm telling the truth." He turned to the crowd. "You all know Richard Langford, a good man. You came here tonight to honor him, but the woman who stands here pretending to love him is the reason he's in the ground." Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's eyes flashed with panic. "That's a lie! He's grieving!" Edward raised a hand, and the large screen behind them flickered to life. A recording played, Emily's own voice, cold and clear. By the time they realize we'll be gone, Richard was just in the way. The room went dead silent. Martha stepped forward, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. "We loved you like family, Emily, and you used that love to kill our son." Emily stumbled backward, pale and shaking. "No, no, that's not—" Mr. Hensley stepped up beside Edward. "For the record," he announced, "Richard's will included a morality clause. In the event of fraud or deceit by his spouse, the estate is forfeited to charity." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed. Caleb, lurking near the bar, turned and slipped toward the door, abandoning her without a word. Emily's breath came in shallow bursts. Her mask, her money, her lies, her beauty was all crumbling under the weight of truth. "You can't do this to me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. "I earned this life!" Edward looked at her with a sadness deeper than anger. "You earned your shame." The crowd watched in stunned silence as security escorted her out, her heels clicking against the marble, like fading echoes of the woman she'd pretended to be. Outside, the night was cold and unforgiving. Rain began to fall again, washing down the grand steps of the Langford mansion, the same rain that had fallen on Richard's grave. And as Emily Langford disappeared into the darkness, the town of Maple Hollow finally saw the truth. She had buried a man for his fortune, but it was her soul that ended up in the grave.
The mansion stood silent again, its windows dark, its halls echoing only with the ghosts of what was lost. Emily Langford had wanted wealth, power, and freedom, but all she'd earned was shame. As the rain washed the marble steps clean, Martha whispered softly to her husband, "Justice has strange ways of finding its way home." Edward nodded, eyes fixed on the storm outside. "It always does." And somewhere in the distance, the church bells of Maple Hollow rang, not for grief this time, but for peace. Thank you for staying tuned. Please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories coming your way.